Good afternoon. I am the moderator of this session. My name is Sun Yoo-han, professor at Korea University. We will begin session 9-3 of KGFP, which is on direction of Inter-Korean Forest Cooperation for United Forest in Korea. I thank you for joining us. This session will be carried out through online streaming, and because of the quarantine guidelines, related to COVID-19, only the presenters and panelists are participating. Others who are joining us via online, you are joining us through YouTube, to my understanding, so let us begin our session. First of all, let me introduce the participants. Our first speaker is Director Kim Myung-gil of the National Institute of Forest Science. Thank you very much for joining us. And next, our second speaker is the Secretary General of the Korean Sharing Movement, Mr. Hong Sang-yong. Thank you very much for joining us. Our third speaker is from Seoul National University, Professor Kang Ho-sang. Thank you. And next, our panel discussants. First of all, Deputy President Kwon Yul of KIEP, Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. Our next panel discussant is Director Kim Myung-kwan of the Korea Forest Service. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, our panel discussant, Chief Research Fellow Dr. Chu Jang-min of the Korea Environment Institute, who will be joining us online. Thank you very much. And aside from our speakers and panelists, I understand many people are joining us online. Because of the spread of COVID-19 in the metropolitan area, we were not able to invite you to this venue. We ask for your understanding. So this session will be composed of 3 presentations followed by a panel discussion. Those joining us online, please raise your questions, and after the panel discussion, we will be able to hold a Q&A. Please utilize the QR code on YouTube and you will get your chance to raise your questions. I would like to give 15 minutes to each speaker and 10 minutes to each panel discussant. So let us go on to the first presentation.
I invite Dr. Kim Myung-gil of National Institute of Forest Science. Since 2002, he has been with the National Institute of Forest Science, and since 2017, he has been studying the SDG international cooperation and the impacts of humanitarian aid, and also Inter-Korean Forestry cooperation and policies. Today's presentation will be on measures for Inter-Korean forestry cooperation linked with Inter-Korean cooperation. Thank you. Good afternoon. I am from the Global Forestry Division of the National Institute of Forest Science, or NIFOS. So I want to talk about the direction of Inter-Korean forestry cooperation. And my topic is to slowly but to rush. It is not the best of times to engage in Inter-Korean cooperations, but in 2018, we were able to engage in some forestry cooperation with North Korea thanks to slow but sure research by my seniors. And so I wanted to entitle my slides as Vestina Lente. So I want to look at what is happening on the front of Inter-Korean forestry cooperation research. So if you look here, this is the photo of the borderline between Haiti and Dominican Republic. You can see good forestation in Dominican side, but deforestation in Haiti. So we need to care for and protect our forestry. Depending on the state, the ethnicity, or race, you can see a clear difference in how well forests are managed. If you look at the border area of North Korea and South Korea, or North Korea and Japan, the China-North Korea border, you can see it's very clear. It very clearly shows the difference in afforestation and also on the border lines between the two Koreas. So how much and how is the state of deforestation in North Korea? And how is the forest managed? So we started to monitor since 1999. And first of all, what's the definition of forests? So first, we want to focus on the definition that forests belong to any land that is above 8 degrees in terms of slope. And North Korea also set up a agroforest program. And agroforest land would be the farming land with a slope of 15 degrees or higher. So in 2008, we found there are deforested areas and forests. Deforestation rate was about 32% in 2008, and every 10 years, we look at the state of deforestation in North Korea. Deforestation means unstocked land, not stocked land, but unstocked land and bare land and developed lands that are used for housing. So we monitored the situation, and then in 2018, we looked at the regions nationwide. Compared to 2008, when there was 2.88 million hectares that was deforested, but in 2018, there was a drop by about 20,000 hectares of 2.62 million hectares that was deforested. So why was this decline possible? Based on literature and reports, it is our conclusion that in the DPRK, forestation goal is 1.68 or 1.73 hectares per year, and they are working hard for afforestation and producing seedlings and developing nursery are some of the focus areas. And we do see some efforts being made in the DPRK for afforestation. And in 2018, in the New Year address, Kim Jong-un said that afforestation and reforestation would be pushed forward for the overall afforestation of North Korea. And afforestation means planting trees in the mountains, and reforestation means creating forests around the urban area. For example, you can see here that near Wonsan, in order for afforestation to happen, you can see from the satellite image that trees have been planted, and near Pyongyang as well. Thanks to park creation through reforestation, you can see more trees. Then, along with North Korea's efforts for reforestation, how can we engage in cooperation with the North, and also what can be done by researchers? After the Panmunjom Declaration came out, on 2 occasions, forest cooperation was discussed in 2 sessions, which included modernization of tree nurseries and agroforests and prevention of wildfire and erosion control projects. And we decided to engage in more cooperation and exchange achievements of science and technology. So we looked at what forest reforestation technologies North Korea has. They focused on developing seedlings of trees that have good survival rate, and they focus on agroforestry management, firewood forest, seed production, as well as reforestation. And other than planting trees, preventing forest fire and predicting fire, and preventing blights, preventing landslides, and also to when they conduct survey of forest resources, it is important to send manpower, but it's also important to use remote technology to monitor wildfire. So these are some of the areas of interest of North Korea, and we selected some tree species where we can work with North Korea for afforestation. First, we needed to look at the usage of the trees, whether they are for special use or others. So we did a literary research to pick out these tree species according to usage and made the suggestion to the Office of Forest. And for agroforestry management model, the DPRK is marking decade-based plans. They divided the ecosystem into 4 regions, and we have 39 districts. And we are looking at them to how to manage agroforestry in these 39 regions and what kind of trees to plant. And then in the DMZ, as I showed you earlier in the first picture, the borderline between North and South Korea, particularly in the Goseong-gun and Pyeonggang-gun region, and then Cheollang-gun regions, the state of forestation is quite different. So in order to reforest the DMZ area, we used satellite technology and remote sensing and photo taking to monitor the forestation state. And we still have the data. And as for forest fire prediction system, in the DMZ, my division satellite team is working on it, but not only reforestation, but how to create forest pathways is another topic that we are working on with the Forest Welfare Division. And as for wildfire prediction system, in a press release, we do see the locations of wildfire in North Korea, and we also use a satellite technology and corroborate the two. And we also look at some of the disclosed data from the DPRK to compile a prediction database to look at which points and which areas in North Korea are prone to wildfire. And we are also looking at this data with other divisions in my institute to conduct joint research. And the Baekdu mountain range from all the way to the top of the north to down south, we conducted a survey on Baekdu mountain range. There is a Sepo-gun in North Korea, which is home to a large livestock industry. If we see deforestation in that area, we think of how we can reforest the area and also what is happening to biodiversity. If the two Koreas are able to engage in exchange of information, we will have to conduct co-survey. So for Baekdu Mountain, our forest reforestation division and our division is working together. And like I said, 28% of all the total forests in North Korea have been deforested, but the 72 remaining areas are well alive, and we need to protect those regions. And there are some primitive forests that need to be preserved. Near Baekdu Mountain, there is very natural primitive forests, and Ogasan region particularly has good level of preservation. So in order to conserve this forest, we want to look at what kind of genetic resources there are in this region and what is the biodiversity state and climate change impact. Sometimes when we have international scholars speaking about this region, they also monitor the changes taking place in these regions of DPRK. So a survey on primitive forests will be very important, which is why we are conducting joint research with Forestation Division and also with Biological Division in terms of genetic resources. So we have multiple data sources, database, video images, photo images, satellite data, and more. Rather than just keeping those data in the archive, we want to make it available for exchanges with relevant workers. So we are building a platform of North Korean forests. So up until last year, we had the plan to develop a platform, and this year we will be building the platform. And starting next year, we want to pilot run the platform among some of the researchers, and then maybe starting from the year following, we will be able to disclose this for public use. And we also compare the terminology, forest terminology between North and South Korea. We have a forestry terminology dictionary, and we looked at some of the different terms that are used in the two Koreas and also common names in English that are also used. So we have 3,600 words on the terminology list in terms of nursery, erosion control, forestation, blight control. We have about 3,800 words. And there are some words, about 20% of the words are only used in North Korea, not in the South. So for those words, we want to continue to this is a big task to resolve once inter-Korean forest cooperation resumes. And with the team that looks at economic analysis and the functions of the forest, Industry Research Division is doing relevant work. And we did a impact analysis, and if inter-Korean forestation cooperation were to occur, we will be able to prevent disasters in border areas, promote health of forest ecosystem, gain carbon credit, and mitigate PM. And in the north, we'll be able to prevent forest disasters and deal with food shortage, and also have some public services which will lead to public value of 160 trillion won, and gain carbon credit worth 100 billion won. So once this cooperation resumes, we have the necessary data that will be needed, and when the cooperation resumes, we will be able to push forward with cooperation more easily and based on knowledge and information on the DPRK we already have. So on the Liberation Day, the president declared the new Korean Peninsula initiative as peace economy. So in particular in the region of economy and technology, forestry cooperation will be very important. And when the inter-Korean economic cooperation begins, again, we will need to be responding very quickly in terms of forest cooperation, and in the long term. Well, to do that, we are going to urgently respond with inter-Korean forest cooperation support the task force, and in the long term, we have a research council. So to do that, we need a system for continued cooperation. For technological cooperation, not only the research institutes, but industry and academia need to work together, and we need your support. To execute the projects, our organization, public organizations, and local governments and private sector groups that are here today, we need your help as well. And we are working on collaboration with the FAO and other international organizations to build a steady platform and network of technological cooperation. Thank you very much.
예, 고맙습니다. 김관.
Thank you, Ms. Kim, for your presentation. As you can see from the title, Inter-Korean Forest Cooperation should follow Vestia Lente, so slowly. We must start with the very basics, the fundamentals, and then one by one, step by step, we should set a future direction. But we need to rush on responding to urgent tasks. So in that context, the National Institute of Forest Science has shared with us what can be done for inter-Korean forest cooperation, and also in terms of the system of cooperation. We needed to build a platform for exchanging information and using information that we share. You shared with us a very important ideas and actual plans. Thank you very much to Ms. Kim for your great presentation.
두 번째 발표
Let's go on to the second presentation by Secretary General Hong Sang-yong of the Korean Sharing Movement. Mr. Hong, starting from 1997, participated in the Korean Sharing Movement as a working-level officer. He has worked in the field for humanitarian aid projects in North Korea and inter-Korean exchange and cooperation projects. He has experience in carrying out cooperation with North Korea on agriculture, healthcare, and forestry sector, and is making an effort to build trust with North Korea. He has been working as the Secretary General of the Korean Sharing Movement since August of last year. So today he will be giving a presentation on the topic of the role of inter-Korean forestry cooperation in the private sector. So Director Kim talked about the role of the government and research institutes in terms of inter-Korean forestry cooperation. She talked about what should be the preparations by these entities, but Mr. Hong will be talking about how the private sector can lead inter-Korean forestry cooperation and what were the past efforts, what are the obstacles going forward, and how will they be able to promote cooperation. So I would like to invite Mr. Hong. Yes, thank you very much. My name is Hong Sang-yong. Today, I would like to talk about the role of the private sector in inter-Korean forestry cooperation. What is the current status of cooperation, and what are the challenges going forward? In order for inter-Korean cooperation to take place, we need the right environment. First of all, we need to deal with the issue of North Korean sanctions, and also we need to have a joint understanding between the two Koreas. So when we have these two conditions in place, then we will be able to pursue inter-Korean cooperation. I'll be talking about then what is the current status at this moment. After the 2019 Hanoi summit, as you probably know, inter-Korean relations have stagnated. There was a breakdown of the Hanoi summit, and as a result, well, everything was affected. All of the agreements reached by the South Korean and North Korean government has not been implemented. It's been very difficult to implement, and also following the Pyongyang summit, there were many projects that the government of South Korea was preparing for, but it had been very difficult to implement because some of them required the agreement and the understanding of North Korea and the U.S. And during the 5th plenary meeting of the 7th Workers' Party of Korea in December 2019, North Korea came out with a new direction of self-reliance and talking about the frontal breakthrough policy, a strategy. And then after that, January 20th, it shut down its borders with China in order to deal with the issue of the spread of COVID-19 coronavirus. And then also there was the shutdown of the liaison office between the two Koreas on January 22nd. President Moon Jae-in in May of 2020 said in a press conference that South Korea will try to find ways to work with North Korea rather than just waiting for dialogue between North Korea and the U.S. to restart. So, and then the first vice director of the Central Committee of the WPK, Kim Yo-jong, mentioned about her distrust about the role of South Korea, that it is not implementing anything. And then after that, there was explosion of the liaison office. So we are seeing the inter-Korean relations heading for the worst. What is the reason for this? First of all, it is because of the breakdown of the North Korea-U.S. negotiations and, of course, the sanctions against North Korea. And also, it is because South Korea is building up its military power. Another would be that North Korea believes that South Korea has to accelerate on its implementation of agreements reached, whereas South Korea has a different idea. So there is a perception gap when it comes to the speed of implementing the agreement items. And then there is the issue of North Korean sanctions. Now, I think it's the same for North Korea as well. But the sanctions have become a great obstacle for pursuing projects. Not only the government-led projects, but also the private sector-led projects are all influenced by the sanctions, including the humanitarian support efforts. So if we look at some of the humanitarian aid for North Korea, these programs have been affected by the North Korean sanctions. In order to lift the North Korean sanctions, as you can see, or in order to receive exemption, there is a certain process that has to be followed. So through the South Korean government, an exemption request can be made to the UN Exemption Committee. This is a very complex process that has to be followed. And so, first of all, we need the approval of the South Korean government, and then we have to receive the approval of the UN committee in charge of giving exemptions. So there is this dual challenge of receiving two different types of approvals. In August of 2018, the UN Sanctions Committee provided a guideline in relation to the exemptions for North Korean sanctions. Up till now, there was no guideline, there was no specific explanation about what to do when one wants to be exempt from North Korean sanctions. So it was finally in August of 2018 that a process was established and announced to the public. So if you follow the process, then we will review your application, and if we deem it's okay, then we will give you an approval. That was the position of the UN Sanctions Committee. And also there was a move to minimize the unintended impact that the sanctions have. So a number of international organizations and NGOs started to apply for sanctions exemptions, including our organization. Because in 2018, we had visited North Korea and agreed to resume some of the suspended programs that we had put into place, including building a tree nursery in North Korea. But with the sanctions in place, it was difficult to actually carry out the programs at the field. We made promises, but we were not able to make good on a promise. So we thought, what can we do? And then we heard about the exemption process. But as you know, the UN is located very far away, and we felt that it was not easy to apply for the sanctions. We have to do everything in English. We did not know much about the international rules and regulations and the sanctions, but nevertheless, we decided to push forward to receive an exemption for the sanctions against North Korea. And so starting from June of 2019, we prepared for the application for sanction exemption in regards to the Kaepung Tree Nursery program. This program had already been carried out from 2007 to 2010, but this had been suspended because of the May 24th measures implemented by the South Korean government. And we had agreed at the end of November 2018 to resume this program. So this tree nursery was to be built in the North Hwanghae province, Kaesong City, Kaepung district of North Korea. And KSM and the Gyeonggi local government would be supporting this. Our role was to provide the related equipment and materials. And also we had to rebuild the buildings, the greenhouses, and also we had to provide the containers for the young trees. And we had to send the fertilizers, etc. So we had applied for a sanction exemptions. The photos were taken at the tree nursery. This was when we were actually engaging in the program back in 2007 to 2010. We had the South Korean experts visit the tree nursery and also engage in technology cooperation with the people who are managing the tree nursery there in North Korea. So there was 152 items that were involved in this program. So this would include the containers for the saplings and also the various trees, the tractors, and the solar energy power plants. At that time, the tractors and the solar energy related power plants, well, the view was that even if this is for a humanitarian purpose, we will not be able to receive an exemption for these types of equipments because up till then, no such equipment had ever received a sanctions exemption from the UN. But nevertheless, we decided to take on the challenge and we were able to receive the approval for sanction exemption. And then, once received an approval, because we have a precedent and because this case was announced and made public, many other organizations started to apply for the sanction exemption process. For example, the medical supply related sanction exemptions were given. We also were able to receive another sanctions exemption. And also there was the COVID-19 related equipment and items that were able to receive exemptions from the sanctions. A total of 8 programs received exemptions, including the quarantine materials for the African swine flu and agriculture cooperation. I think that this actually is a very meaningful achievement. So then, after this experience, I came to think that the private sector can play a great role in promoting inter-Korean cooperation. So, going forward then, how can we engage in inter-Korean cooperation in the future, especially for humanitarian purposes? So there are times when items for cooperation falls under the sanctions, and then there are times when the items do not fall under sanctions. So if the program falls under UN sanctions, but the North Korean side is willing to carry out the programs, then what we can do is we can apply for exemptions. If North Korea refuses the program, then there is no way to carry out inter-Korean cooperation program. So, for example, let's say that there is the food aid program or a medical support program or a knowledge sharing program. There are many different programs that we can cooperate with North Korea. And I think that also in the field of forestry, we can push for cooperating with North Korea. And when such programs fall under UN sanctions, then we can apply for an exemption because we already have the experience of receiving exemptions for the Kaepung tree nursery. So, then, going forward, what should be the direction that we should take for inter-Korean cooperation, especially in the field of forestry? Well, first of all, I think that we have to think about the reforestation efforts by North Korea. I was quite surprised to find that even after the Kaepung tree nursery program, I was quite surprised about the level of reforestation of North Korea because back in 2010, well, North Korea built a tree nursery number 122. The People's Republic Army of DPRK number 122. So as you can see in the photo, I thought that this tree nursery was built, and then North Korea went on to build a tree nursery of that same scale in Gangwon province. And then I could see that one by one, these large-scale tree nurseries are being built in the different locations throughout North Korea. For example, in the South Pyongan province was built after the Gangwon province, and then there was a Pyongan City tree nursery, and then the North Hwanghae province tree nursery in 2020, and then Nasan City, and then Nampo City. So the two tree nurseries in Nason and Nampo were established in 2020. So the Pyongan province, the Hamgyong province, Hwanghae province, we can see that in each of the provinces, large-scale tree nurseries are being built. And if you look at the size, according to the north, there are about 20 million in size. So if each province has a tree nursery of this size, then I think that this is enough to really carry out reforestation of North Korea. So then, in which area should we cooperate? Which field requires inter-Korean forestry cooperation? Because tree nursery building, I don't think requires the support of South Korea anymore. Of course, to build a tree nursery, you need the expertise and knowledge. So perhaps we can focus on knowledge sharing in the field of forestry for establishing infrastructure. The infrastructure might already be there in North Korea, but also the infrastructure requires various materials. So perhaps we can provide support in terms of the equipment, the consumable goods or disposable goods, and also materials required for managing the tree nurseries and the forests, as well as preventing the blight. And then there can be exchanges in cooperation in terms of the and this is also an area that North Korea believes is very important. But I think that there needs to be cooperation in terms of the seeds. And North Korea is interested in this area as well. So I think that exchanges in forestry, particularly in the seeds, is an area that we have to focus on. And maybe we can come up with specific programs for cooperating with North Korea. And I think that the private sector can also play a role here. Yes, thank you very much to Secretary General Hong. He explained about how the private sector was able to find a breakthrough for inter-Korean cooperation despite the stagnated inter-Korean relations. As you know very well, the UN Security Council sanctions have made it difficult to pursue quite a number of programs in North Korea. But I think that really it's learning by doing. We really have to try it to know whether something is possible or not realistically. And so after confirming that, we have to try in order to know whether it's realistically possible or not. So not only in the field of forestry, but also in other fields, I do hope that such efforts can be expanded to different fields. And so, like he said, 8 programs in various fields were able to receive exemptions for UN sanctions. Thank you very much for sharing valuable information. Secretary General Hong especially talked about his efforts focused on the tree nursery programs, but he said that we have to go beyond that for forestry cooperation, for example, technology exchanges, and also working on creating various forests. And he gave us a number of different ideas. Thank you very much.
번의 발표
So with these two presentations, we heard about how the government and the private sector groups are looking to engage in forest cooperation with North Korea. But now let's hear from an international organization's perspective. The third presenter is Professor Kang Ho-sang from Seoul National University. Mr. Kang is a research professor in National Instrumentation Center for Environmental Management and Industry Academia Cooperation, professor of Institutes of Green Bioscience and Technology since December 2019, including Northeast Asia, ASEAN, Central Asian nations, and Africa, and the DPRK. He is developing, managing, and implementing international projects. Since 2005 to 2019, he has organized around 20 international workshops or meetings on the capacity building of forest-related officers and researchers for the DPRK. Today's presentation will be on using international organizations to revitalize inter-Korean forest cooperation. Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon. We heard from the opinions from the government and the private sector, and I would like to speak from the international organization's perspective, or more specifically IUFRO, and how we can use this route to revitalize forest cooperation between North and South Korea. So this is the IUFRO, International Union of Forest Research Organizations. 126 years ago in Europe, IUFRO was established, and including the National Institute of Forest Science and different forest departments and universities, we are participating in IUFRO. There are about 650 member institutions from 120 countries. Voluntarily joining the network of forest researchers. The scope includes physiology, timber processing, forest protection and economy, and afforestation. There are 9 sections, and different temperature-based regions are also divided under the subsections, and there are 80 different working groups depending on their areas of research. Not only that, but forest education, water, fire, these are topics where multiple sections should be involved. So we have 10 different task forces as well. This is a group of forest researchers and experts. And we have a special program for developing countries, which focuses on developing nations, forest officials and researchers and scholars, to invite them to workshops and to build capacity, how to respond to wildfire and blights. And EUFRO or IUFRO is based in Vienna, so APA-FREE is in charge of Southeast Asia, and NEAF under the corporation under the Korea National Forest Service is in charge of Northeast Asia and Korea, and KT in Latin America, for NESA in Ghana, Africa, are in charge of training programs to build capacity in developing nations. Since the Kim Jong-un administration, since 2014, we have been engaging directly with North Korea, and I wanted to tell you what kind of discussions there have been. It all started in 2005, about 15 years ago. We have held a number of different workshops. In the Kim Jong-un regime, what I feel is that the number of participants have become much younger. Those who graduated from Kim Il-sung University, Pyongyang Science University, and so forth, the so-called elites from North Korea have joined the group of forest research. They are fluent in English. They issue international proposals. You see in the picture Baek Won-chul, head of science and design in North Korea, are a part of this workshop. So we have a number of experts who are pushing forward with forest policies in North Korea. We have our own workshops, but in 2014, when the time was very, very hard, the Korean American group called OZCAM And we worked together to co-host a workshop. As a Korean American group, they wanted to involve more international experts, while we were focused on involving and engaging North Korea. So the people marked in this picture return to our workshops. In international workshops or conferences, the North Korean participants that I meet are really those in charge of those relevant areas in the DPRK. And by joining these international workshops, they work towards building trust and more practical and realistic cooperative projects. And they have been of great help. In July 2014, as you can see, we have Kim Sung-jun, Deputy Head of General Bureau of Forestry, participating in our workshops. He is often the delegate, North Korean head of delegation when he comes to the tables to meet us. And we also have Minister Park Jong-ho of Korea Forest Service participating. He was the then Secretary General. And these two figures represent North and South Korean side. And by meeting at these international workshops, they are able to share their priorities and exchange information. We have also the current head of National Institute of Forest Science also in the picture. So a number of different experts came together to discuss inter-Korean forest cooperations. These people were actually policymakers and decision makers, which made our workshop more meaningful. And in 2015, in South Africa, the 14th FAO World Forestry Congress was held. And Mr. Kim Kyung-joo, the Minister of Land and Environment Protection of the DPRK, came. And next year, we will have, in May, a World Forestry Congress in Seoul. Because DPRK is very interested, we were able to learn that the DPRK is very, very interested in forest cooperation. And Mr. Yoo Kang-chun is the Director of External Cooperation Department of General Bureau of Forestry. So these people came together to discuss forest cooperation with North Korea, not only between the two Koreas, but also with neighboring countries. This is a great opportunity to engage in such talks. And this one is a FAO Asia Pacific Forestry Week in the Philippines. This is a biannual regional meeting. And again, you see Mr. Liu from the External Cooperation Department of General Bureau of Forestry. And we also have representatives from the FAO. And through FAO, we can contact the DPRK side, and we have a liaison who engages in close cooperation with the DPRK. So having a communication channel with the DPRK is very important in cooperations like this. And those who are in charge of DPRK at international organizations provide that route. And UFRO is in Vienna, Austria, as I said. And at the UFRO Asia Congress, Regional Congress for Asia and Oceania, we had the head of our National Institute of Forest Science and the head of the General Bureau of Forestry of the DPRK came and discuss cooperation measures. There is a DPRK office in UFRO, and also because UFRO is in Vienna, they often come to UFRO to discuss UFRO activities and training programs. And the DPRK keeps sending their experts to UFRO meetings. So we are able to identify the needs of the DPRK. And if possible, our government and the National Institute of Forest Science can provide direct support to discuss more about inter-Korean forest cooperation. In 2018, not only UFRO, but FAO, we had a joint international workshop. FAO is more project-based, but UFRO also discusses scientific technologies with the National Institute of Forest Science, and we've invited multiple experts from different institutions. What the DPRK really needs is scientific knowledge that South Korea has when it comes to forestry. So we were able to directly introduce that to the DPRK. So in multilateral meetings, North and South Korea cannot engage in direct talks, but in small workshops like this, we are able to do that and discuss in Korean. And here, this is the International Congress on Planted Forests, which was held in China in October 2018. After the Panmunjom meeting, under the National Forest Service, we had the Inter-Korean Forest Cooperation Task Force led by Mr. Cho. And then Mr. Chang Yong-chol, the deputy head of General Bureau of Forestry, met at this Congress to discuss what kind of measures can be taken for inter-Korean cooperation. Of course, on the first day of the meeting, those specifics cannot be discussed, but later on, it is possible to discuss that. So other than those official channels, we are 1.5 track or less official routes that we can use to raise efficiency and accessibility of these cooperations with the North. And this is the Asia Pacific Forest Insect Pests and Diseases meeting. And one other example of where inter-Korean experts came. So Mr. Lee Sang-young from the National Institute of Forest Science, and from the North we had Mr. Kim Yong-il from the External Cooperation Department of General Bureau of Forestry. So blight in North Korea is very, very serious. Once it reaches Kumgang Mountain, it will be very detrimental. So North Korea and South Korea can discuss that topic, and the DPRK have a number of different blights that's caused by a number of different insects, and that impact pine trees and other trees. So we can discuss those blight topics, and Mr. Kim Yong-il from the External Cooperation Department of General Bureau of Forestry and Mr. Chung from the Inter-Korean Forestry Cooperation Task Force Group are able to meet face-to-face, and we can create many more of such opportunities, which will definitely help and contribute to pushing forward inter-Korean forest cooperation. And last year, UFRO, every 5 years, you will hold a World Congress, and we had one in Brazil last year, and all the people I mentioned earlier were there from the North, those in charge of forest research, and also from the General Bureau of Forestry. And we have Mr. Chung Bang-kun, head of National Institute of Forest Science, and people from the university all came together to engage in talks, academic conferences, and we were able to discuss in a very scholarly and academic manner what is being done in North Korea. And Mr. Kim Myung-gil mentioned Ms. Kim Myung-gil mentioned new terminology in her presentation. And of course, North Korean terminology is quite difficult to get used to, and we can also discuss those topics in these settings. So at the UFRO World Congress, Mr. Kim Yong-il from the General Bureau of Forestry of the DPRK was able to become the vice chair of one of the research groups of UFRO as an officer. And every year, at least once or twice, we are going to meet him. And we also set up an email channel where we can discuss and communicate with him at any time. And these are Mr. Yu Gang-chun or other researchers from North Korea who make proposals on forest projects. Because the DPRK lacks firewood, even if we plant forests, we are not able to provide enough firewood. And how are we going to provide renewable energy and seedlings? And how are we going to boost survival rate of these seedlings? Are some of the topics of their proposal from the DPRK. And these are topics where DPRK really urgently needs help on and in terms of scientific technology. So these also present good opportunities. In October 2017, North Korea invited experts from XPOs to suggest proposals, for example, on energy. Of course, one of the reasons behind deforestation is is firewood, so energy, and how to boost income among farmers, agroforestry management projects. So these are some of the topics that North Korea has developed project concept papers on, and they submitted it to FAO. And based on this concept paper, we can enrich it and send it back to the DPRK to raise the possibility of inter-Korean cooperation. So what the DPRK wants can be supported by South Korea, and we need to find more of those opportunities to revitalize inter-Korean forest cooperation. And because the DPRK submits a concept paper in English, and the budget is 400,000 US. And in red, it says degradation of 1.93 million hectares of forest has been happening in the DPRK. So we have our own estimates, but I wonder how 1.93 million hectares of deforestation was calculated. So we can discuss on that. And there are some main objectives and the reality in the DPRK. So to give you the conclusion, through international groups and organizations, we can engage in steady, long-term cooperation with the DPRK, and we can identify what the DPRK needs by analyzing the concept paper presented. And unlike North and South Korea, international organizations can actually enter into the DPRK to obtain objective data on the degree of deforestation there. And the current state of the DPRK can be identified with more accuracy. And in terms of impact of blights or tree nurseries, of course, direct cooperation would be best, but if not, we can also use the international organizations to engage in cooperation nevertheless. And through international organizations, what's most important is that we can, whether it's forest experts or building trust, whether it's experts or government officials, we can build trust on a long-term basis to revitalize efficient inter-Korean cooperation. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Kang. You focused on UFRO activities. Engaging in academic conferences and workshops that can be used to widen the consensus for inter-Korean forest cooperation and to build trust. You shared with it the process. The area of forests is really least political compared to other sectors. But nevertheless, depending on inter-Korean relations, sometimes it's difficult to push forward cooperation. In academic exchanges for forestry is, I think, particularly not political, and it is easier to start cooperation on. So I think that is why this sector can be very flexible and a great boost to open up new possibilities of cooperation. So in that sense, international forest-related academic research institutes can be used to engage in steady cooperation with the DPRK to build trust and also to build consensus and widen that consensus for inter-Korean forest cooperation, which will ultimately lead to implementation. So those are the important steps to take. And thank you very much for that presentation. And now we heard from all three presenters, and we want to look at how we looked at how inter-Korean forest cooperation can be possible. So now I'd like to invite the three discussants to talk about how inter-Korean forest cooperation can be revitalized. First, I would like to invite Mr. Kwon Yul, Deputy President of KGFP, or Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. Mr. Kwon is in charge of Asia Studies and External Development Economics and International Economics. He has studied development economics and international economics and focused on Southeast Asian studies and participated in the negotiation for Korea ASEAN FTA and so forth. He was also a member of the International Development Cooperation Working Committee and the Foreign Affairs Advisory Committee and the Presidential Advisory Committee on Sustainable Development. Mr. Kwon, thank you very much. I am in charge. I am heading the International Cooperation Center at Kiev, and in particular, we are in charge of ODA. Support and aid to the DPRK is considered to be a part of international cooperation. So, in accordance with the International Cooperation Act of the South Korea, we are unable to provide ODA to the north directly, but we are still very much interested in doing so. So I would like to take this opportunity to make a few suggestions. And we heard from 3 speakers, including Director Kim, from the government side, from private sector, and from international organizations. So we heard about the inter-Korean forest cooperation in different aspects. But I would like to start by saying that inter-Korean talks are at a stalemate and all other cooperative projects are on hold. But in the mid to long term, the system of international support and inter-Korean relations coordination will be requiring important preparation and research. So on that note, the first thing I'd like to say is that in the international community, since the UN announced the 17 SDGs, all 192 nations, including developing states, are a part of SDGs, including the DPRK. So there are 6 international organizations with a permanent office in Pyongyang. And there are the National Coordination Committee, where the 6 organizations are a part of with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the DPRK. So they have been working on how to make SDG more feasible. So the UN country team has been set up to provide specific and comprehensive support to the DPRK. And in that context, DPRK is opened up, has applied for a voluntary review by the UN country team. This was planned to happen this year, but it has been put on hold because of COVID-19. So considering all this, inter-Korean forest cooperation so far has been reaping great achievements, and going forward, I think we have a good outlook. But I would like to say that we have a KSDG in order to implement the SDGs. This was announced in 2018, which passed the National Assembly then. So deliberation is complete now. So why don't we build a Korean Peninsula Sdg set up? And as a notable project under a Korean Peninsula Sdg, we can pursue inter-Korean forest cooperation to be more practical. The number 15 SDG is to protect land-based ecosystems. The biodiversity, reforestation, land erosion due to flooding and droughts, restoring those lands are a part of goal number 15. And we can expand on that by implementing a Korean Peninsula SDG. And the most notable project can be found in inter-Korean forest cooperation. In 2018, when I worked on the KSDG, I was heading the number 17 goal working group. And at the time, there were much discussions about how we can pursue inter-Korean cooperation. Our working group wanted to set one additional goal, number 18, building peace on the Korean Peninsula. And that under that goal, we wanted to include healthcare, cooperation, support to the vulnerable class, to children, and for inter-Korean forest cooperation as well. Or another idea was that all of the goals should be integrated with the goals of the DPRK through the liaison office to set up a Korean Peninsula goal instead. And that can open up possibilities for more cooperation. For example, on the KSDG, there is a national biodiversity strategy and land restoration projects and stopping of deforestation. So we actually set up a plan for forest management, so we can think of how we can link the forest management plan with that of the DPRK. And we can use some of the Forest Protection Act, for Afforestation Act, and more acts or laws that we can use in conjunction with the DPRK. And until 2030, we can set up a comprehensive support system to supplant inter-Korean cooperation. In that case, all the different projects that has been mentioned earlier will be able to more systematically be set up. Goal number 17 includes developing nations through global partnership. Developing nations support through global partnership. And the key task under that goal is to boost capacity of the developing countries in terms of building their SDG implementation plan. And as mentioned by Director Kim, we have great achievements from 8 projects. But if we can focus more efforts on SDG implementation and provide policy consultation or provide scientific and technological support, I think that'll be a great idea to not only engage in inter-Korean cooperation by circumventing direct or government-based cooperation, but we can also engage in international cooperation by involving Switzerland and other countries with great interests in forests. If that can happen, so far I think we were too much focused on individual projects in pursuing inter-Korean forest cooperation. But going forward until 2030, for the implementation of the UN SDGs, we will be able to pursue inter-Korean forest cooperation in a more systematic manner. When the DPRK sets out its new 5-year plan, we will be able to also use these kind of cooperation as a message sending to the world on peace on the Korean Peninsula. And rather than submitting our own VNRs, sometimes maybe we can combine the VNRs of North and South Korea for SDG implementation, particularly on forest cooperation. Then I think we will be able to gain more international support and also better urge the world to take responsibility. UN sanctions have been comprehensive sanctions so far, which has come under much criticism, particularly from the humanitarian support world. And now humanitarian support are exempted from the sanctions, but what we can do, the way we can do this more actively is through forest cooperation, because humanitarian support and development support, right in the middle is forest cooperation. So in terms of peace building on the Korean Peninsula, I think this can be a very good pilot project. So whether it's National Forest Service or the National Institute of Forest Science, I hope that you can use the current stalemate as an opportunity to urge the world to move and to integrate the two Koreas through the pilot project of inter-Korean forest cooperation. If that can happen, I think we can encompass all that has been said by the 3 presenters. And with the mid to long term, we'll be able to pursue the authorities in the north. Thank you. Thank you very much, Director Kwon. Deputy President Kwon. Well, the most important agenda globally is sustainable development and the SDGs. In that sense, forestry is directly linked to goal number 15, but also to number 17. In particular, sustainable forest management, or SFM, are one of the many different mechanisms that can be used and linked to SDGs to engage in inter-Korean forest cooperation and turn it into a more global issue. That is my understanding of your comments. And in particular, forestry is an area that can be humanitarian and also is linked to development of a nation. So in both areas, forestry cooperation can be accepted. So using it well can also be a way to comply with the SDGs, the biggest and highest priority of the global agenda. And we can gain justification of the project and also the motivation and driving engine to make it possible. Thank you for sharing with us the good, a very important suggestion.
를 모시겠습니다.
Let us invite our second panel discussant, who is Director Kim Myung-kwan of the Korea Forest Service, who is in charge of inter-Korean forest cooperation. He has been working at KFS since 2001 and has worked in major departments. He became the director of Inter-Korean Forest Cooperation of KFS this year, and he's leading the overall South Korea and North Korea forest cooperation policies of the Korea Forest Service. In addition, he is striving not only to cooperate between the authorities of South Korea and North Korea, but also to create consensus among the people and gain support from the international community. So he is trying to promote the Korean Peninsula peace and prosperity by unifying Korea through forestry. Please greet him. Yes, thank you. I am in charge of the Inter-Korean Forest Cooperation at KFS. My name is Kim Myung-kwan. Our organization, the Inter-Korean Forest Cooperation, actually was installed this year. And so last year, and I became the director this year. So we support programs with North Korea and also co-projects with the private sector and also the international community. So I would like to talk about the importance of inter-Korean forest cooperation and also focus on some of the programs that have been pursued at the government level. So right now, indeed, there is inter-Korean forest cooperation is in a stalemate, but we do believe that we have to resume such activities. If we look at the inter-Korean forest cooperation, like it was mentioned, it is the most non-political field for cooperation between the two Koreas, and also it is a way to jointly tackle the issue of climate change with North Korea. Forest cooperation is needed for North Korea, but at the same time it is needed for South Korea as well, because we have to deal with the yellow dust issue and also climate change and also the overflow of the rivers in the border area and also landslides. So these related matters are quite important challenges faced by both North and South Korea. So the two Koreas, they have to join hands and tackle the issues related to forest cooperation. In 2018, there was a Panmunjom Declaration, and then there was the September 2018 Pyongyang Joint Declaration, which also touched upon forest cooperation as one of the priority tasks for inter-Korean cooperation, and just shows how important our cooperation in this field is. This year, we have experienced heavy rainfall, and this led to floods and also landslides. It's not only South Korea that has suffered damage, but also North Korea. So there has been heavy rainfall during the monsoon period, and also the sanctions against North Korea and the COVID-19 has been known as the three evils of North Korea, which has made the economy of North Korea even more difficult. Starting from 2009 for 5 years, who is the head of the Pyongyang office of UN, has said that in order to minimize the continuous damage of floods, we have to resolve the issue of deforestation at the North Korean mountains. So deforestation in North Korea actually not only intensifies forest-related issues, but actually it directly impacts the lives of the North Korean people, in particular food supply. As it was mentioned by the three speakers before, currently North Korea is showing very strong will for reforestation. During the Kim Jong-il leadership, there was the arduous march. And then after that, however, we have seen that there has been, and at that time, there was not much attention paid to reforestation or forest-related issues. But with the leadership of Kim Jong-un, we can see that there has been active efforts to improve the forest situation in North Korea, and we can see that some of the projects led by North Korea has seen some successful outcomes. So when listening to people who have visited North Korea, there has been signs of such strong efforts by North Korea to build up its forest resources. And also we can see that deforestation damages have decreased. But right now, there are some challenges to reforestation because right now already the damaged areas are quite widespread and also the soil has been damaged, so we cannot just plant trees and expect good outcomes. So the reforestation is actually quite complicated. So I think that an all-out effort, comprehensive measures have to be implemented for building up North Korea's forestry again. We have to first analyze the issues that North Korea's forest sector is faced with. Actually, we have been engaging such analysis on a 10-year basis. For example, in 2002, there was a research conducted near the Imjin area, and there were consultations by the two sides. And then also, starting with efforts in 1999, there has been various exchange programs and cooperation programs led by the private sector and the local government. And these efforts by the private sector and local government actually plays a role of a catalyst to improve stagnated government-to-government inter-Korean relations. If you look at back in 2018, there were two meetings related to forest issues, which had led to many different agreements. And the related authorities of South Korea had visited Pyongyang and Kaesong and the Kimgang Mountain as well. And also, we have seen some major progress in terms of cooperation in the field of providing materials. So we are preparing for forest cooperation under three strategies. First of all, in the initial stages, we want to carry out joint programs so that we can build trust, especially focused on joint responses in the border area. And also, we want a future-oriented and reciprocal cooperation program. That is what we would like to suggest to North Korea. We want to take small steps and win the low-hanging fruit first and gradually expand our efforts. So I think that we can focus on modernizing the tree nurseries, for example, and modernizing the equipment that North Korea has. And for that, I think that we need to, and that's what we're doing. We are focusing in Paju and Gosong of Gangwon Province, where we will establish a forest cooperation center. The Paju Cooperation Center is not only for cooperation in the field of tree nurseries, but also technology exchanges, and also it will deal with logistics-related issues for cooperation in North Korea. And then in Cheollon, Gangwon Province, we will also build a specialized cooperation center that's specializes in forest-related issues. And also, we are expanding technology advice provided in the field of forestry. As it was mentioned by Mr. Hong, we do believe that the private sector-led efforts can actually open up the watershed for promoted government-led programs as well. And we are providing consulting services as well to expand the cooperation. And also, AO, UNCCD, AFOCO, we're thinking of ways to involve them as well. As it was mentioned by Professor Kong, we need more exchanges between the experts in the field in the two Koreas. I do agree with your opinion. And at this moment, when there is stagnated inter-Korean relations and stagnated North Korean U.S. relations, I think that there is a greater role for the private sector to play. And if I add on to that, well, I think that we need to build a governance structure so that more private sector entities can participate. We need to build a coalition so that we can have greater scale cooperation programs. We need to lay the basis for that. And also, for pragmatic cooperation with North Korea, we have to treat each other equally from equal position. And the government is willing to support the private sector-led efforts. And I do believe that we will be able to enjoy synergy effects when there is active participation by the private sector. During the August 15th Liberation Day commemorative speech, President Moon said that joint research in the field of health and forestry and agriculture, we can promote cooperation between the two Koreas in the era of the COVID-19, and then we will be able to open up the watershed. We're going to an era of coexistence and peace. So I do believe that forest cooperation is a way to go towards building up a community of peace and prosperity. So the government right now will be carrying out cooperation programs as it tries to implement the previous agreements reached with North Korea. Yes, thank you very much, Director Kim. So you talked about forest cooperation and the field of forestry. Actually, as it was mentioned by Mr. Gunn, that actually it's a very important agenda because it is part of the UN SDGs. And on top of that, it is linked with issues such as climate change and also the air pollution, fine dust, yellow dust. So you can, like you said, we can resolve these issues by pursuing forest-related programs. I think that forest programs will have very significant outcomes and impact throughout. So the Korea Forest Service, it not only pursues cooperation programs at the government level, but also it supports the programs led by the private sector and also the international organizations. So it supports indirect cooperation programs led by entities outside of the government. And as it was mentioned in the last part of his remarks, I do believe that as a single life community, the two Koreas will be able to build a closer relationship, and that the forest cooperation programs can play that kind of role as a catalyst to make that possible. So I would like to thank Director Kim for your insightful remarks. Thank you very much. Let's go on to our last panelist.
I invite Ms. Dr. Chu Chang-min, Chief Research Fellow of Korea Environment Institute. Dr. Chu is the Chief Research Fellow of the Korean Peninsula Environmental Information Center under the Center for International Cooperation at KEI. From December 2017 to February 2019, Dr. Chu also served as the Vice President of the Institute. He has been on the Subcommittee on Scientific and International Cooperation on the Special Committee on Air Pollution. He was also, since last December, he's been a member of the Presidential Commission on Policy Planning as well. And in particular, regarding inter-Korean environmental cooperation, he has conducted many research, including joint rivers, how to use the rivers, and how to pursue a green detente on the Korean Peninsula. So he looked at many different research. He has issued research reports on environmental status in North Korea and inter-Korean environmental cooperation. Good afternoon. I am Chu Chang-min. from KEI. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you to the three presenters for a very informative presentation. Because of the COVID-19 has been spreading up again, I am joining online. Although this hinders communication compared to face-to-face meetings, I would like to do my best to best engage in communication. So my face is I see is exposed on the screen throughout the time. So I think in a way I am adjusting well to this type of communication. So first I would like to share my comments on the three presentations and ask questions. And if time allows, I would like to share measures on inter-Korean forest cooperation. First, Dr. Kang Ho-sang, you shared with us your direct experience of engaging in North Korea in international workshops and also the FAO proposal from the DPRK. Based on DPRK demand, through international organizations, we can engage in inter-Korean forest cooperation. Although this may be a sensitive topic, what I focused on in your paper was the demand from DPRK submitted to the FAO, and I wonder how we should interpret this. It is impossible to conduct a pre-survey on DPRK on the field. So we are only able to get this proposal presented by DPRK, and if we only provide support based on those papers, that will mean our aid will not have a big scientific ground and hence higher risk. And such a demand, of course, it is important to understand the demand of the people, but I'm not sure whether the proposal itself reflects the people's demand well. Even if we go through international organizations, we need to do our best to understand and identify the real needs of the DPRK in order to reduce risks of this type of cooperation. So that's a very theoretical comment. And I have a question to Mr. Kang. From 2005, for a long period of time, you have been engaging in inter-Korean forest cooperation. So before and after Kim Jong-un came to power, what are the changes in forest cooperation demand that's coming out of DPRK? Next, Dr. Hong.
원장님,
Yes, it's a pleasure to meet you again, although I'm meeting you through an online channel. It's great to see your face again. I think that one of the prerequisites for forest cooperation is to handle or deal with the sanctions against North Korea first. So for reforestation, for example, we have to think about the diseases that can arise in the villages or areas that has been hit by floods and heavy rainfall, and we need medicine in case such diseases arise. Also, we need to provide support for building infrastructure, but because of the sanctions against North Korea, there are some difficulty in providing the materials for infrastructure development and also providing the medication. So, and last but not least,
방안에 대해
To Director Kim Myung-gil, thank you very much for your presentation. And in particular, after Kim Jong-un came to power through the afforestation and reforestation plans, to a certain degree, afforestation has been making progress in the DPRK, which is quite welcome news. My comment here is the South Korean implementation system and the platform for inter-Korean forest cooperation. So legislatively and institutionally, do we actually have a system with which we can provide and engage in steady cooperation with the North? I do not think so. So we need to make improvements on that front. And at the National Institute of Forest Science and the Forest Service, I know that you are engaging in much efforts, but I'm not sure as to what extent your efforts are being known to the public. And you need to communicate with the public. Are you communicating with the public in engaging these projects? And in that sense, I want to ask your institute and the National Forest Service to better communicate to the public. Because from what was said earlier by all the speakers, forest cooperation includes energy, food, and climate, not just or afforestation. So those who are involved in this type of cooperation, whether it is from the government or the academia or whether it's the general public, we need to engage a wider group of participants in order to give impetus to such cooperation. So on an ending note, I would like to add a few of my own views. First, inter-Korean forest cooperation is about reforestation in the north and ultimately linking that to reforestation in the south. So we need to take a more comprehensive approach rather than focusing solely on afforestation and tree planting. We need to focus on a more general, wider scope of forestation. And secondly, in the short term, because of the typhoons and much rain this summer, we need to provide humanitarian support to help North Korea recover from landslides. And by doing so, we can establish a breakthrough in inter-Korean relations, because this can also lead to more research and cooperation on forests. And thirdly, we again need to meticulously monitor the information on the state of forestation in the north. From 2012, for 9 years, I looked at Kim Jong-un's New Year's address and looked at the forest area. And it has been mentioned 5 times in his New Year's address. And recently, not just reforestation, afforestation, but how to manage a forested region was mentioned. This means that DPRK's policy not only is about reforestation and afforestation, but also forest management. So by reflecting this change, forest cooperation also needs to change. And also, last but not least, inter-Korean forest cooperation has been focused on deforestation. And restoring deforested area is important, but also to manage a well-preserved forests should also be happening hand in hand, so that development projects do not damage or harm forests in North Korea. So that is my final suggestion. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chu. You gave your comments and simple questions to the 3 speakers, and also you made 4 suggestions. And as you have just heard, restoring forest ecosystem on the Korean Peninsula needs a comprehensive plan and approach when we engage in inter-Korean forest cooperation. And I couldn't agree more. Personally, I sometimes think that maybe we can set up a research institute for inter-Korean forests, maybe for Hallasan in the south and Paektusan in the north. And then that way we can conduct comprehensive research on forest ecosystems in both countries. So we need to look at the entire Korean Peninsula as one single ecosystem and to take a more comprehensive approach to preserve the ecosystem. And secondly, you also mentioned a very urgent humanitarian support needed to restore the landslides and the flooding and typhoons. So forest cooperation can start in those urgent areas as well. So that's another great idea. Earlier, Dr. Kang, also, on top of giving your comments on Dr. Kang's presentation, you said that we need to understand what the real demand of North Korea is, rather than just stopping at restoring deforested areas. Managing the reforested areas would be very important in engaging in ensuring that forests are well managed consistently. And on the last note, you also said that preserving and protecting forests is also important. That should be implemented hand in hand. I think there was a question to Dr. Kang. So, before and after Kim Jong-un took power, what are the changes happening in forest cooperation with the North through the international organizations? Could you answer that questions? Yes, thank you for the question. Regarding international forest cooperation, the North Korean Forest Research Institute is a part of UFRO. And for forest development and cooperation needs, North Korea is compiling a plan and submitting it. And they recently submitted another concept paper to the FAO on what the urgent projects are. In the north, for example, 170,000 hectares are suffering from blights near Baekdu Mountain, and there were very, very specific data that supported this. And our agents will go into North Korea. And you raised the suspicion that people cannot actually go to the field to collect the exact data, but that's actually possible according to Mr. Philomander of FAO, the Secretary General. They do send people on the field in the DPRK. And if it hadn't been for COVID-19, FAO and other UFRO would have been able to hold an international workshop with the DPRK. And that way we can also approach the actual accurate data. Thank you.
추장민 박사.
Dr. Chu, you also had a question to Director Kim Myung-gil. So for inter-Korean forest cooperation, don't you think that we needed a implementation platform for Korea and also more efforts on gaining information and notifying the public? So does your institute have any research on building that platform or any policies that are directly related to this? Thank you very much for your comments. At my institute, one of the research being done uses satellite research to do survey on stocked land and deforested land. As I mentioned in my presentation, depending on the Korean Peninsula's geopolitical situation, there can be different directions. First, at a humanitarian aspect, I mentioned the nursery for 6 tree species in terms of planting trees, but also in terms of protecting forests, we also consider fighting blights and fires and the strategies and preparations for climate change. And I think it's important to engage in humanitarian cooperation, but in economic development cooperation, how much resource, labor force, services will have to be dispatched, and what kind of technologies, what kind of investments are needed. And as Dr. Kwon Yu mentioned, in terms of SDGs, what are the future steps to take? So these are the areas where international or economic cooperation areas that we are starting our research on. As for the policies or institutions, the platform that you mentioned, once the last year we have duly installed the Forest Cooperation Task Force. They are making new rules and regulations and guidelines. Last year, the task force started to be revitalized, and the Forest Service took the initiative to notify the public and helped to build consensus and looked at ways to promote this to the public. And also, Paju Cooperation Center was also set up to hand out seedlings, and they held other events to promote the projects. And as for technology, as far as we can, we promote our activities through press releases and on our Facebook page. And for policy support, we work with the Ministry of Unification or the National Information Service or the Ministry of National Defense to provide our support. And for public promotion, I believe that Mr. Kim Myung-gun will be coming back to that point. And your third comment was whether it's energy, climate change, or food. We need to encompass all those topics in our comprehensive reforestation, as we call it. So human-based, of course, ecology will be important, but human-based, the people, the resident-based forest landscape restoration is the ultimate direction we are taking. And strategies are being researched under that goal. So I'd like to ask Mr. Kim to take over.
네.
Yes, I'm Kim Myung-kwan of the Korea Forest Service. So if I may add on to that, we can utilize the Ministry of Unification into Korean Cooperation Fund. So each year there's a budget of 1 trillion, and for the forest sector we have about 10 million won allocated for use. So on top of that, for the forest sector, there is additional budget for the South Korean side, which has been provided since 2019. So the Paju Cooperation Center and the Kosong Tree Nursery operations, and also there are other support and cooperation programs that requires funding, and that is why there is a separate budget for the use of South Korea in the field of forests. And also there are some South Korean programs as well. So in order to have a unified approach for the South Korean government-led cooperation program, we work with various ministries and agencies. We have a research TF, for example, with the Ministry of Unification and other agencies, and we discuss various topics. We make decisions, and we think about how we can carry out support activities. So we want to have a unified front at the government level when we carry out cooperation programs. And also for promotion activities, well, there is a separate organization for private sector participation. And so this organization works to enhance understanding of the Korean public for the need for inter-Korean forest cooperation. Last year alone, this inter-Korean participation organization worked with 11 private sector organizations. We established an MOU so that we can have more people participate. Because of the COVID-19 crisis, right now people are participating via online channels. But last year we utilized our offline channels. For example, we worked with the Semaul Central Organization and also the media agencies so that we can have more people participate and find ways to carry out joint programs in South Korea. So this was once again to collect opinions of the people and also to promote our cooperation efforts in South Korea. So I think that we have to do more to obtain a more widespread understanding for the need for inter-Korean forest cooperation. Yes, thank you very much. You talked about how you're laying the foundation for promoting the inter-Korean forest cooperation. You talked about the various research activities and also other programs in place. Thank you very much. Now, among the panelists or speakers, are there any comments or questions that you would like to share? If not, then perhaps we can take the questions that have been raised using the QR code. Yes. So then let's take a look at one of the questions that was raised through our online platform. First, the question goes to Mr. Hong. In your presentation, you talked about the tree nursery program, and you said that North Korea actually has its own tree nursery establishment program. So, having said that, does this mean that the South Korean side, can scrap the tree nursery support program for North Korea? And also, aside from blight prevention and tree nursery development program, what is the most urgent program or task in the field of inter-Korean forest cooperation? Please answer. Yes. Well, first of all, in relation to the tree nurseries, well, there's a large-scale tree nurseries, as we can see in the different provinces in North Korea. And then at the city level or at the military level, there are these different scale of or sized tree nurseries. So I think that we do still need cooperation for tree nurseries, but in the large sense, I think that at the provincial level, North Korea is building large-scale tree nursery. So going into the future, I don't think that for the establishment or modernization of tree nurseries and building the related infrastructure, we don't have to be that actively involved. But we have to think about how we can provide the quality seedlings or the young trees so that we can enhance the quality of these tree nurseries. So then I think that what's most important are the seeds that are provided. In order to have good seedlings, we need the good quality seeds. So how can we secure the good seeds, the quality seeds? I think we have to first find the seeds that are right, or the types of trees that are right for that region and area. So we have to first select the right types of trees, and also we have to think about whether we'll go towards mass production. For that, those are the types of issues that we have to shed more attention to. Thank you very much. So there's a lot of questions, but let me just raise one more.
정해 듣겠습니다. 우리 권율 박
This is a question to Dr. Kwon Yul. Through UFRO or FAO, if we engage in cooperation through international organizations to engage in inter-Korean forest cooperation, to make this really happen, what steps do we need to take? And what can we do directly? So we engage in academic exchanges and hold meetings internationally, but through international organizations, if we want to actually develop a real project, what can we do and what steps do we need to take? So Dr. Kwon? Yes, earlier I briefly mentioned that in 2015, UN resolved to implement SDGs, and as a member of the UN in 2016, North Korea also set out a new SDG strategy, and it has been very active through UNESCAP and other organizations to set up its own SDGs and announce them. UN also has 6 international organizations stationed in North Korea. And the UN Steering Committee is holding meetings with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the DPRK, and they are setting up working groups. the implementation progress are divided into priorities and need. And they issue annual reports on food or forests or all environment-related issues to, based on that, ask for international support. But for humanitarian support, UN has allowed humanitarian support to go into North Korea. But UN also has a country team designated as a channel for North Korea. And within that channel, other than the 6 stationed organizations under the UN, including the FAO, there are private sector groups and international universities or research institutes that can take part in that support. So that door is open. So in terms to take the leadership in inter-Korean forest cooperation, we need to be more active in participating in these international routes on top of pursuing direct cooperation. So when UN sets up working groups like this, we should be a part of those activities and try to join those activities. And what kind of activities can we do? Well, it can be nursery projects that can be presented as successful case stories. And while doing so, we can ask for more support by other groups and enlarge the projects and globalize it. And secondly, the international community requires transparency to be improved. UNICEF and many other organizations are actually sending their employees to the field throughout DPRK to monitor. This is very difficult to do at a private sector level or NGO level. So we need to work together with the international community to look at the humanitarian aid projects and development aid projects, to monitor them, to see if they are making real progress and what the current state is based on the statistics collected on the field. And that is being done by the UN and shared. So in that way, we can save time and cost. International communities are pursuing individual projects through cooperation with private sector or groups or international organizations and their working groups. What's important is we should also take global leadership rather than focusing on individual projects. So to do that, we need to widen and revise and revamp and improve the inter-Korean cooperation framework so that it can be linked with international cooperation and aid going into North Korea. So the most important step to take is policy revitalization. Our own forest plans and SDG, KSDG implementation plans that I mentioned should all be integrated and monitored together. And to do this, we need to provide technical assistance to North Korea, not based on individual projects, but to boost their policy capacity so that North Korea can better implement SDGs. So we need to fully establish this kind of support so that we can transcend inter-Korean cooperation and widen that cooperation. Switzerland, Sweden, or other third countries or other Asian countries are being a stepping stone for experts and government officials to be trained. Vietnam, China, Thailand are some of the countries that we can work on joint projects. Because if direct cooperation or aid is not possible, we can work through that, bypass that system by working with third countries, third party. Canada or many other countries, despite the sanctions, are working with Kim Il-sung University, conducting a training program in Canada. And there are many other support that's being provided on the side. So many policy research projects can happen right away. So we need to use international organizations so that these projects can be pushed forward in a more transparent way with great achievements. Thank you very much, Dr. Kwon. We need to take the initiative and effectively pursue many different projects. In the interest of time, we are unable to answer all of the questions that you have posted online. Before we conclude, I would like to give a final chance to the discussants or presenters. Yes, Kang, Mr. Kang, please. Thank you very much, Professor Son. North Korea has been stressing tree nursery projects, but among the nurseries, of course, seed. They have been mentioning seed many times, from seed orchards or seed planting grounds. They need good quality seeds. And they are getting many different seeds from other countries. And in the New Year's address, forest protection is more of a focus now, to protect the forest from fire or blights. Of course, trees have been planted well, but protecting them well would be the ultimate step to take for forestation. And we discussed with FAO many times, and we understand that FAO's forest projects are focused on agroforestry. And they also focus on food and nutrition improvement, particularly on high altitude residents. Malnutrition there is very serious. So we want to plant vitamin trees. I think they are called the Hippopea. The academic name is Hippopea. So they are inviting experts to conduct relevant research on how to process the fruits from vitamin trees. And that report was also issued. And also restoring landscapes, forest landscapes as well. Experts have been called in to look at not only one side of forest, but from a more comprehensive perspective. And FAO suggested the hand-in-hand initiative recently. North Korea is refusing to receive support from South Korea. So in that case, other countries or other groups can come in to provide hand-in-hand support. For example, China can work through FAO in North Korea, and then relay the message to the General Bureau of Forestry, so we can divide the work. For example, we often worked through Indonesia to provide help to West Timor, Timor-Leste. So those are the ways we are looking into. Thank you very much for your comment. Anyone else? No? Okay. Thank you. In today's session, we looked at direction of inter-Korean forest cooperation for united forest in Korea. The area of forests, in particular inter-Korean forest, from a larger perspective, can be linked to SDGs, which is a very globally important agenda, and climate change or diversity of vegetation. So this is an area where we can also address globally important issue of environment. And secondly, through inter-Korean forest cooperation, we can build the life community on the Korean Peninsula. This project connects the two Koreas into a single life community. Nevertheless, there is much investment to be made. When we conduct cooperation and restore forest in North Korea, as Director Kim has shared with us, there are many different numbers. We can create 160 trillion won of public or common value. We can gain about 100 billion won in carbon credit. So economically, this makes sense. So inter-Korean forest cooperation must happen, and successfully. From a long-term perspective, there can be ups and downs. Sometimes things move on smoothly. Sometimes, like right now, we are at an impasse. Nevertheless, cooperation in forest must happen and continue on, and ultimately, the entire peninsula should be restored with a united forest. I would like to thank the three presenters and discussers for your great presentations and comments. And above all, I would like to thank everyone joining us in person and online in this difficult time, listening to the discussion, and thank you for posting great questions as well. And last but not least, I hope Inter-Korean Forest Cooperation continues on so that our posterity will be handed over a beautiful mountains and rivers. With that, I'd like to conclude this session. Thank you very much.